Been a lot of moving and shaking on the vaccine front, so it's a good time to once again bring in Trinity Health of New England's Dr. Syed Hussain for You Ask, We Answer. He joins us again. Dr. Hussain, good morning. How are you this fine Friday?
Morning. Very well, thank you.
Glad to have you here. Okay, so we have just learned that the CDC and the FDA have now given the okay for Moderna and Johnson & Johnson booster shots. What is that going to mean for the overall vaccine effort in Connecticut and the U.S. as a whole?
This is fantastic. We're ready. It brings it on par with the Pfizer recommendations that the FDA and CDC weighed in and approved. So we are ready to go and ready to start administering booster doses to those individuals that fall under these groups. So just to reiterate that, at 65 and above, those individuals 18 and above who have a medical underlying medical condition that puts them at higher risk for developing severe COVID-19, and if there's occupational risk for developing or contracting COVID-19 disease.
Do you anticipate at some point maybe that will be expanded even more just to include everybody over the age of, say, 16 or 18 someday?
Absolutely. I do believe it's a matter of time.
Okay. I'm also curious because the FDA and the CDC seem to be okay with mixing different brands of vaccine. Obviously, in their opinion, it's good enough. I'm curious, though, in some cases, would it be advantageous to mix the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, which works one way, with either of the mRNA vaccines, Moderna and Pfizer, which work on a slightly different principle? Would that confer any additional benefits?
Sure. So that's a great question. So let's look at data. So earlier this year, we heard reports from Europe that the AstraZeneca vaccine was causing some rare side effects, especially in women. That led some countries, including the UK, Germany, and other countries in the European Union, to start giving one of the messenger RNA vaccines. So there are plenty of European studies now out. One of them that got published last month was called Vaccelerate from Germany, that basically indicates the mixing and matching of vaccines is effective, and neutralizing antibody levels are quite high, conferring a high degree of protection in those that have received two different types of vaccines. So I do believe this strategy works. And one important thing to remember is if you're a younger woman who's received a Johnson & Johnson vaccine and it's now time for a booster dose, you may want to consider a messenger RNA vaccine if you're a little hesitant about the clotting risk. And same thing for young adult males, 18 to 24 years of age, who may have received a messenger RNA vaccine, can actually now get a booster with a Johnson & Johnson.
That's interesting. Doctor, I know we've talked about booster shots. We've talked about antibody levels. My understanding is, though, that's only a very small part of the overall immune response. There's more long-term work that the body does with memory cells that we don't hear as much about. And that may be because these things are harder to gauge. What have we learned in terms of how the body handles protection against COVID long-term, and what that means for maybe the severity of the disease if you've been vaccinated or if you get it a second time down the road? What do we know? What do we not know?
So there's still a lot that we're learning, and most of this will be born out of real world data. So Israel, for instance, which was one of the first countries to start the booster dose campaign based on higher incidence of infections that they started seeing in people. So one important thing to remember, though, is this is not a very stable virus. This virus continues to mutate and new variants keep popping up. So far, the vaccines that are all currently licensed have been extremely effective in preventing severe disease and death, and we hope that continues. But more as we go through this pandemic, there'll be more data that will hopefully help answer this question. And again, it goes back to the same point: how frequently will these booster doses be required? Will this be an annual vaccine? So those questions hopefully will get answered in the months to come.
Yeah, it certainly could be the case in the future that you just sort of get your flu and your COVID vaccines at the same time, maybe even in the same vial, but time will tell. Dr. Hussain, you join us every Friday to give us your knowledge and get us up to date on the latest developments. We thank you for your time again.
Thank you for having me.
Glad to see you again. All right, here's